From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast episode on where are your relationships taking you? You know, I think it's Jim Rohn who said, we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And I think there's so much truth in that quote. The 5 people closest to us influence us the most. We start to think like them, we start to eat like them, we start to talk like them, we start to dress like them. And so when we think about success in life and outcomes in life and increasing our influence in order to achieve those outcomes we want and the success we want, it's really pretty important to stop and think about where are our relationships taking us? How are the people around us influencing us? Are they helping us become the best version of ourself or not? And and perhaps maybe the answer is no. Perhaps that relationship has another purpose and we're helping them become the best person that they can be. Maybe we're influencing someone else to become their best self. But I challenge any of us to sit down and list the 5 closest relationships in your life. And then how are those people helping you become the person you want to be? How are those people helping you be the best version of yourself? And maybe more importantly, how do you increase your influence with those people in those relationships? Because these are pretty critical relationships, right? If these 5 people are determining some of the success or most of the success ultimately that we have in life because of their influence on us, positively or negatively, every relationship, each of these 5 relationships are either pulling us up or pulling us down, then I think it's pretty critical to stop and think about that. And how those people influence us, and if their influence is not a positive thing in our life, if it's not taking us in the direction of where we want to go in life, then maybe we need to reflect on a boundary in that relationship, or changing what that relationship looks like, or perhaps just spending less time in that relationship. I'm not saying you should just quit talking to all of the people that you think don't have the same goals as you in life, but maybe being more intentional about thinking, what are the 5 relationships that are impacting me the most? And there again, there are always going to be times when we grow and we leave people behind, right? And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean we don't still love them or care about them. It just means we're going a different direction in life. And much like you grow in your career and you change jobs, sometimes you grow in your character and you change relationships. And so I'd love for all of us to spend a bit of time thinking about those 5 relationships. And probably for most people, the first relationship that comes to mind is your spouse. And there again, I'm not saying you should just automatically terminate that relationship, but think about the relationship that you have with your spouse, and how are they helping you become your best self? And how are you helping them become their best self, right? Influence is a two-way street. And particularly this primary relationship, whether it's a spouse or a partner, that one is very critical because we do spend a lot of time and our discretionary time with that person. And certainly we're going out to eat with them, or we're eating at home with them. We pick up their snacking habits. We start to eat like them, and we watch the same movies, and we maybe read the same books or listen to the same podcast. But really thinking about, with intentionality, how is that relationship helping me become better, and how am I helping that person become better? And again, you're not saying you're just going to terminate that relationship, but be intentional about thinking, am I influencing that person in the way that I want to, and are they influencing me in a positive or negative way? And if so, what changes do I need to make? And there may be absolutely no changes that you want or need to make with respect to that relationship. It might be simply increasing your awareness of how that person influences you. And I'll share just a personal example for me. Typically, and I've been pretty transparent about my running, and it's one of the things that drives me to be healthier. I'm more intentional about sleep because I'm running and want to, do good in my running. And so I'm more intentional about eating, not perfect, certainly, but more intentional about those physical habits that help me athletically be successful. But one of the things that has been an indulgence is kind of just a self treat, a self reward, is that pretty much anytime over I usually do a long run on early Sunday morning, and pretty much anytime I would go more than about 13 miles, there would be a reward on Sunday afternoon, and it generally was a bowl of ice cream. Usually, when Mac and I would sit down to watch a movie on Sunday afternoon, or maybe just some one-on-one time or something, but typically it would be like, man, I had a long run, so now I can kind of have a treat, and that reward looked like a bowl of ice cream. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But what I realized was that just because I was sitting down to enjoy a bowl of ice cream didn't necessarily mean that I should be influencing Mac to want to have a bowl of ice cream with me, right? And so I needed to think about that and saying, I'm not necessarily, and making that choice for myself, and maybe I can indulge a little bit more because I ran 13 miles this morning, but am I influencing him? And he didn't run 13 miles this morning. And so I need to be intentional about that choice because I'm influencing him, right? And so there again, I'm not saying that the answer is never eat ice cream again, or I'm not saying I'm not going to eat ice cream again. I'm just saying when I reflected on how I was influencing him in that way, that I needed to be more intentional about that influence. And how would that change my influence in that relationship if I'm more intentional about am I rubbing off on him positively or negatively? And, that's just an example. It's just an example. I hope that kind of helps you see how this principle relates. But a lot of times we don't really think about how the people who are interacting in our inner circle are pulling us up or pulling us down. And there again, I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm just saying be intentional about where those relationships are taking us. Because it's true that we typically find it pleasant to be around people who are like us, right? Who have shared values. And that's one reason we hang out with these people. We have mutual values, and it's pleasant to be around the people who have our shared values. And there's nothing wrong with that. But because you have at least some shared values, you're spending a lot of time in those relationships, then it's pretty important to think about maybe some of those values that they have aren't shared values with you. And are you being intentional in that space, in that moment? And even if they don't share all of the values that you have, you can certainly be intentional about just minimizing that influence on you. If it's maybe a habit that you don't like, and I'm just pulling one random out. Maybe this person that you spend, maybe you've got a close friend that you have been friends with since you were teenagers in high school. You went to high school together, and 20 years later, you're still friends with that person, but they smoke and you don't smoke, right? And so maybe when you're around that person, sometimes they smoke, but you don't necessarily have to smoke just because they do. You just have to be intentional about not letting that influence you in a negative way. Now, a lot of times we do tend to spend more time with people like if they smoke, we smoke because that's a shared value, right? Doesn't mean that we have to engage in that behavior. Just means that we do have to be intentional about how it's influencing us, how people talk. This is absolutely one that we don't always think about, but the whether the words that we use, the way that we talk, the are we positive or negative, and how we use phrases, is our outlook on life positive? There's all different ways that we can think about how those relationships are influencing us. And when I talk about the five people that we are intentionally closest to, your inner circle, right? these are, again, the first person that comes to mind is probably your spouse, and then maybe a parent, or sometimes it's another close relationship, a close friend. It's maybe some work relationships, but I'm really talking about those discretionary relationships, not just the people you work with, because you're not really necessarily choosing or electing to spend a lot of time with them. But if it's a person that you work with, but you're also hanging out with them on the weekend, then yeah, that's a pretty close relationship, and you have shared values, or you wouldn't be hanging out on the weekend. And so, yeah, that would be one that you might consider as closest to you and in your inner circle, because you're spending time with them when you don't have to. So there's got to be some level of shared values with you. And I think this is interesting because I can kind of see this, and I love to think about this in something like the gym, which is usually when I go to the gym, it's for group fitness. And that's just one of the things I've understood about myself is I'm a social exerciser, because it's much more fun to be miserable if you're miserable with other people, right? So typically when I go to the gym, it's for a group fitness class, but I am a people watcher, and it's fascinating to me to see how relationships form in those group fitness classes. And you kind of start to see how people connect with one another, and then they start to, maybe they always ride the same bike in spin class. Maybe they always set up their weights next to each other. And then there are some people that don't, right? There's some people that just at some level don't have those same shared values. And so you'll see them on the other side of the room from another person, for example. It's always fascinating to me to see those social dynamics, but I can absolutely see that. At some level, you see the friendships that strike up, and you know that there's a basis there because of shared values. So, my whole point to that is thinking about those relationships and where are they taking us? Because there again, we do start to eat like the people around us. I see this a lot in the running groups that I run with, and there are some running groups that I don't really particularly enjoy running with, because we just don't have the same shared values. And again, that doesn't mean somebody's bad. It just means we're going different directions in life. But certainly, when you get a bunch of people who are running together, the conversation centers around food a significant majority of the time. And we'll talk about, oh, try this healthy recipe or try this healthy recipe. But it's easy to see how those relationships that we spend some time with can influence us, right? And are we being intentional about where we're going and where they're going, and where does that overlap? And if it doesn't need to overlap so much, what are we doing to put a boundary there? And that's the hard part, is sometimes we realize that as we grow, we are naturally going to grow away from some of those people that were close to us at one point. But if you're growing, you can't stay still, right? I mean, that's the thing about growth, is if you are growing, you're not going to stay in the same place. And it's natural that there are some relationships in your life that are those people are not interested in growing. They're going to be the same people doing the same thing, and they'll be doing the same thing in 20 years because they're not growing and they have no interest in growing. But if at some point you start to grow and develop yourself and that person doesn't, then you will grow apart. It's just natural. So being intentional about, is that a good thing? Is that a natural just result of growth? And if I want to continue this relationship at some level, I still have to be intentional about investing time into it, because if I'm naturally growing away from that person, and I don't, I do want to keep the relationship at some tact, I've got to be really conscious, working hard about putting a deposit back into that relationship. And that's just a natural cause and effect of growth. Is as we grow, we are going to grow away from some people, and we're going to grow closer to other people. If you become more growth oriented, you're going to find that you are closer to the other people in your life that are growth oriented. And this could be positive. I mean, this could be personal, or it could be professional. That's why, sometimes you get along with the people. Maybe you decide to go take a certification or study for an exam for a certification, or maybe you go to college for a couple of semesters and you kind of form some bonds with those people you're in the classroom with, you're studying with, and you're spending time with, because there's already a relationship based on shared growth at some level. If you're both there for college after work, then you obviously both value growing yourself and your competencies in your professional career. So there's already a foundation, but maybe you've had the experience of, going to take a couple of college classes or studying for an exam or a certification, and you spend a few months and you're all growth focused, and then after graduation or after the exam or after the class is over, you just kind of naturally fall away from that person, and you're not talking to them, you're not interacting with them. And so you can r- see how it's easy to grow and grow apart. So there again, just a quick podcast episode to help you think about, where are your relationships taking you, and are they taking you where you want to go in life? Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.